والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء نبينا والشفيع لذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم مؤمنين مؤمنات brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman Salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Last night we moved on to verse number 2 of Surah Al-Mu'minun, where Allah says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alladhina hum fi salatihim khashi'un. So the first trait for those who are successful mu'mineen, those whose iman level is a successful level, the first quality is that they are humble in their prayers. So the first point that we highlighted was Allah is not saying that the first quality of a successful mu'min is that they pray. Again, praying is a prerequisite to coming into this discussion. It's about how we engage prayers, how we perform our prayers. We said, let's define humility. Humility, we said, was when an individual lowers themselves and understands the status and state of something above them and beyond them. For us, we said that this leads us to a two-way relationship. So, as our practical steps of learning how to get humility in our prayers, we said we have two things to focus on. One is about our own self, and one is about knowing Allah. So we started with, of course, the one which was higher, which is knowing Allah. We said normally when we understand God, sometimes it's numerical, right? It's just we know that there's one God and that's it. Sometimes we go beyond that, we understand proofs for the existence of God. We said that in order to possess that true humility, we have to go beyond that rational God, the God that is simply just, and that's a God that simply exists as one God. We said we have to understand this loving, compassionate, merciful God. This God that is allowing us to exist moment by moment by moment, continually allowing us to gain His blessings and barakah to purify ourselves. When we understand it this way, it makes us ashamed to continue to disobey Him. And this brings us to the second part, which was understanding our own self and self-reflection. Once we understand God's greatness, then we have to understand on the other side our own lowliness and debasedness and how much nothingness we actually are and what we really represent. We said that sometimes individuals, they might recognize that to some degree. They know that, okay, I'm a created thing and God is the creator. But we said we have to take it a step further and see why is it perhaps that sometimes we can't express our humility properly. And we said sometimes it's because although we think we're being humble and we think we're lowly creatures, we express ourselves in non-humble or arrogant terms. So when we allow our ego to express itself through things like my or I, right? When we start taking possession of things, especially when it comes to political discussions, my rights, my liberties, my freedom. So these ideas, the more and more we speak this way, the more and more we're attracted by these kind of ideologies, the more the ego builds up and the more it's strengthened. So we said as another practical tip, in order for us to reduce our own level of egoism and egotism, is to try to limit the way that we use these first-person pronouns. See if you can make a third-person pronoun extension instead. So instead of saying my phone or my iPad or my car, just say the car, the phone, right? Things like this. And it gives less fuel to the ego. The last piece of advice that we had left off was a narration which is attributed to the fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farj. So this narration, it seems to be a spiritual advice regarding those of us who, let's say, maybe even recognize that we are low individuals, that we sin, but sometimes the ego also feeds off of other individuals. It feeds off of us being judgmental and harsh and critical of other people. So in this one advice that's mentioned, the Imam gives about 10 different qualities of someone that's an abd, that's a true slave and servant of Allah. The last one is the one that we're pointing to. We said that whenever the Imam says in this narration, whenever an abd, whenever a person meets anyone else, whenever they encounter any other individual, they think to themselves, huwa khayrun minni. This person is better than me. That's a beautiful hadith that's attributed to the Imam. And it sounds nice, but understanding the reality behind what's here, it's something else. Now, we might say that, okay, this is easy when it comes to meeting, let's say, other followers of the Ahlul Bayt, right? If you meet somebody that you know recites more Quran than you, or let's say they pray more than you, or they're humble, when there's specific qualities you can see in them, then it's easier to say, yeah, I know this person's better than me. It becomes easy. But now, what if this mu'min, or this Shia, this person who claims to be a Muslim, let's say everything you know about them from their external actions is all things which doesn't reflect and isn't reflective of a mu'min, or even a Muslim. So maybe you see them, let's say they don't observe proper Islamic hijab. Maybe you know that they swear. Maybe you know that they listen to haram things or they watch haram things. Their language is not proper for a Muslim or a mu'min. They don't get involved in community affairs. They don't volunteer. They barely come to the center. So deep down, we try to justify and rationalize these things and say, look, they don't do anything. I at least pray. I at least fast. I know I can be better, but I'm doing a few things better than this person. I'm at least outwardly better than them. And again, this is where the Imam seems to be addressing, saying, no, you have no idea what this person is doing in secret. Yes, maybe they're not praying in front of you. Maybe they're not giving charity in front of you. Maybe they're not volunteering in front of you. But do you have absolute certainty that this person is better than you? Do you have absolute certainty that me as a person, my actions, what I'm doing with real sincerity? If we think deeply down, right, we're thinking deep down in ourselves when we offer our prayers, we should be honest and know that my prayers aren't very sincere. They're full of riyah. They're full of this showiness. I don't have this presence of heart. But this other individual that I'm judging right now, maybe they've only prayed once or twice in their whole life. But maybe that once or twice that they've prayed was with full presence of heart. What do I know? We have no idea. And because of that little bit of doubt, then we should be able to say, because I don't know, then I should assume that this person is better than me. Because deep down, what we have certainty of is our own actions. We have our own niyat with certainty. I know that I'm not doing my best, my 100%. I know that. But this person, I have no idea. So I should be able to give them the benefit of the doubt. So now for Muslims, maybe you can say this. But now what happens if you go to a non-Muslim? What happens if you go to, let's say, the worst of the worst, atheist who hates Islam, speaks against Islam, is rude and vulgar, no akhlaq, none of this. Now, there you might say, Hasan, clearly we have to say that I'm better than this person. Come on. There's no Islam in them. They're an atheist. They're rude, whatever. Again, how do we know this? What exactly gives us the right to judge any single other individual? See, we know from discussions in akhlaq that the reason and the way, the barometer by which we're judged is what? Is the amount of ability and capability that God has given us through, for example, our intellect, and how we actually utilize it, right? It's our capacity, our capability, and how we actually utilize that. That's how we're judged. So if I have the capability, meaning I was raised in a household with the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, for example, I was raised in a household where my parents were, let's say, semi-religious. If I was brought to a center constantly, then I'm going to be judged, accordingly. That Allah could say on the Day of Judgment, look, we gave you all the rulings, we gave you a household filled with the message of the Ahlul Bayt, we gave you all these books, we gave you technology, we gave you health and wealth, you had a roof over your head. Like, what excuse do you have not to be a good Muslim, a good follower of the Ahlul Bayt? You had everything in front of you. You were spoon-fed Islam. But now somebody, let's say, who lives off in the middle of nowhere, and in the city or village that they're in, there's not even a message or a mention of the Ahlul Bayt. Maybe not even God. The people around them are just off doing their own thing. For that individual who has never heard anything about Islam, for them to just question a little bit, say, is the way that I'm living the right way? Should I be thinking about something else? Is there something more truthful out there than what I'm doing? Imagine how much more value that has than us who have been spoon-fed and baby-fed Islam, right? We don't know what anybody else's capacity is, even for actions that we might think are very easy. Look at the example of, let's say, waking up for Fajr. Waking up for Fajr for many of us might be easy, or let's say not super difficult, right? We set an alarm, we have good sleep habits, so we wake up and it's not a big deal. Yeah, it could be a bit of a struggle, but alhamdulillah, Allah gives us this power. We wake up and we pray. And then we see somebody else that constantly just tells us, it's tough, I can't do it, I can't wake up. Well, how do we know what is going on deep down in that person's mind? How do we know that maybe physically they just have a huge difficulty waking up? It's one thing to say, I'm not a morning person, right? And I need my coffee. But it's another thing for somebody, let's say, who suffers from something like sleep apnea, for example, right? Or severe breathing issues. Or let's say their body type requires that they sleep for prolonged periods of time. That if they get any sort of interrupted sleep, it becomes very, very difficult for them to fall back asleep or to wake up much later on. So we have no idea what kind of difficulties these individuals might be dealing with. So again, we have to be very, very careful of how we're going to judge individuals. And since we have no idea specifically what capabilities God has given them, then we have no right to judge them. And as it famously says, right? Famously goes, only God can judge me, right? And the only way we can understand that is if we try to apply this idea of the fifth Imam and say that any person that I come across, this person is better than me. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So our first two practical steps were one, recognizing God at a higher level, His mercy and compassion. The second was for us to recognize how low we really are, to change the way that we speak and we judge other individuals, to make ourselves understand why we should be humble. And the third then is the practical of the practical. See, in the first two steps, it was more about theoretical, right? We said that one way of approaching humility is that we take this presence of heart and that will affect our actions, right? Meaning, if I truly understand, as Rasulullah had said in that narration attributed to him, that if a person understood and really was humble in their hearts, then they wouldn't be stroking their beard like that, right? So if you're truly humble, then it should reflect in your actions. So sometimes we have to humble ourselves in our hearts and our minds first, and then it will change into actions. But sometimes we have to do it the other way around. Sometimes we have to force our bodies and force our body parts to humble themselves, and that will actually affect our mind and our heart. So let's give some examples. Now we said that one of the tafasir and one of the explanations of this ayat, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, is that some of the believers, and according to some narrations, the Prophet himself, they would sometimes raise their head up in prayer. When this verse came down, then they understood that they should be more humble in prayer, so they would look down from now on. So now that's one thing that we can do from now on anytime we pray. Force ourselves that not just look down with our eyes at the turba, the muhr and the sajdagah, right? To actually keep our heads down and feel that weight of shame and guilt upon our shoulders and our neck, right? To put it down all the way. And you can force yourself to do that. There's other things that we know. Okay, right? One is stroking your beard or moving your hands around, moving your fingers around, playing with your phone and your keys or whatever you have, even fixing your clothes in the middle of prayer. We know that according to almost all of our maraji', it's makruh to move around unnecessarily in prayer, right? So this is something that, again, just simple ahkam. Try in that moment when you're offering prayer to make sure you're in control of yourself, that you're not moving around too much, that you're not allowing even a simple scratch. Now you might say, okay, but how do I actually do that? How do I know that in that moment to control myself? Because it might be difficult, right? Let's say my phone goes off and I have to stop it at least from ringing or buzzing or whatever. How do we know that? So there's a couple other practical steps. First one would be, if we have all of these signs and call them worldly paraphernalia and worldly objects on us while we pray, there's a greater chance that we'll be attached to those items as well. Meaning this, if I have my phone in my pocket, my keys, tasbih, I have all these things in my pockets, that's an excuse for me to kind of check if they're there. Or when I'm sitting down, it might bother me when I'm praying. Why not take those things off and remove them and put them somewhere else while you're praying? Either in front of you, to the side, behind you, put them in a bag, whatever. Keep them away from you. And this is also a way that you can train your mind and heart too. As you're praying and you're removing these physical objects, you can say to yourself, I want to go towards my Creator, towards my Rabb, towards my Master, without any sense of the world on me whatsoever. I don't want any sort of materials with me. Just myself and Allah, that's it. So I can speak to Him without any sort of connection to the dunya. Now what about the thoughts that come into our mind? Thoughts that might lead us astray. Things that might maybe about work, about family, about money, maybe about community issues, politics. Sometimes we don't think about anything throughout the day. We're completely blank. And the minute we say, Allahu Akbar, everything jumps into our mind right away, right? And we get lost, we get distracted. So our ulama have given some practical tips as well. So this advice comes from Ayatollah Khamenei, hafadhahullah. He says, look, it is natural to lose your concentration. Don't beat yourself up if you lose concentration once in a while. It's normal, it's natural. Now, if you were trained from a young age, then it would be easy. But most of us haven't been trained in mind, concentration, and focus techniques. So he says that, look, it's okay. Once you recognize the problem, then the solution becomes much, much easier. So recognize, okay, I'm losing the concentration. And over time, I'll be able to do these little bits of exercises, mental exercises, and spiritual exercises, and I'll be able to strengthen my mind and my heart. So that's the first thing, recognizing that. Now, the second is practically in salah. Once you lose focus, right? You're, let's say, either in Jamaat or let's say you're praying by yourself. You're in the middle of a surah and some thought comes to your mind, like, I wonder if I left the stove on. So now what do you do there? Basically, in that moment, the moment that you recognize that you're doing something that doesn't belong in its prayer, that doesn't belong there, you have two choices. After recognizing that that thought doesn't belong, you can either take that thought and continue with it. Right? So you can, for example, continue with the thought, say, okay, did I leave the stove on? Okay, well, let me think. And you start back tracing, right? You go back, okay, well, I came upstairs. Before that, I was in the living room. Before that, I was in the kitchen. I was cooking something. And then you start figuring out, right? You're thinking back in your mind. You're retracing your steps to see if you actually turned it off or not. So you allow that one whisper, that waswas to come. The waswasa comes in there, and you allow it to take control over you. That's one option you have. The other option is the minute you catch that thought, in the moment, you say, okay, this thought doesn't belong here. I have to stop it where it is. After the salah is finished, then I can go and do whatever I want. I can check it. But for right now, I'm offering salah. I'm with Allah. I have to have my full concentration on Him. So we have to put that voluntary effort, that mental, spiritual effort in any time that thought comes in. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, right? Because it might be difficult the first few times. You might not even catch the fact that you are losing your concentration. But now with just this reminder, as we go in, inshallah, let's say for Maghrib and Isha tonight, see if you lose your concentration. And that happens, maybe Allah will allow you to remember, hey, you're losing your concentration. Now it's up to you. What do you want to do? Do you want to continue to lose your concentration and focus on the world? Or do you want to continue to focus on me? And this becomes something in our minds. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So this is our discussion ending verse number 2. So now we'll move on to verse number 3, inshallah. So far we have our two verses. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. So, indeed, absolutely, the mu'mineen, the believers, have already become successful. Well, which ones? So the second verse, those who, number 1, are humble in their prayers. Okay, what about number 2? وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. The second quality of the mu'mineen who will become successful and have become successful are those who, when they encounter lagh, they keep away from it and they avoid it. So now we have two discussions over here. Number 1, what is lagh? And mu'ridun yani, somebody who keeps away from it. So we have these lagh, which is basically sometimes translated as vain things or vain talk or idle talk. And then this idea of i'rab, of keeping away from it. So the two points of discussion here will be understanding what does it mean for something to be vain and how do we actually get involved in wasting our time. And then once we recognize that, how can we practically start keeping away from these things? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So what is lagh? Lagh, by many of our scholars of lugha, of language, say lagh is any action or any speech that has absolutely no benefit whatsoever. It's useless. It's worthless. It's unproductive. That's why they translate it as vain or idle. Right? You're not getting any benefit out of it whatsoever. So what then they go on to explain is that the reason it's being mentioned here is because this lagh, this vain, idle, useless stuff leads to a person neglecting, ignoring, and being unaware of God. Because the minute you get involved in fruitless, useless stuff, then things which are useful for you, you start paying less attention to naturally, right? As we said, we narrated a few times, right? رَأْسُ كُلِّ خَطِيَّةٍ حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا. The beginning of every problem and sin and mistake is حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا. So if you attach yourself to things which are finite and imperfect, then you're going to develop love for that. And naturally, you just start to develop a disinterest in things which are perfect and infinite. And a good example of this, which inshallah we'll discuss tomorrow, is the idea of music. Even if it's halal music, which we'll expand on more tomorrow. Sometimes when a person gets involved in haram or halal music too much, they drown in it, that same person, they can't listen to, let's say, recitations of Quran anymore. They don't like to listen to nasheeds or qasidas or things like that, right? They're like, I don't like the sound of these things. Even one of our narrations is very interesting, right? It says that when a person listens to these haram types of sounds, that these jinn or shayateen come into their ears and block out things which are beneficial from them. Now we might say, this is one of those strange sounding hadith, but it makes sense. And you can see the kind of practical implication, right, in people's day-to-day lives. Those who listen to things which are, let's say, un-Islamic, or let's say have nothing to do with their spiritual growth, they don't like to listen to things which have to do with their spiritual growth. Right? That's like, this stuff is corny, I don't like listening to it. And many a times I've talked to individuals who have said this. They say, look, I'm listening to music right now. I want to be able to get away from this stuff. I want to be able to like listening to the Quran. And it becomes very, very difficult for them. Right? It's a very tough thing. Or another example. Most of us who have grown up with terrible eating habits, right? We get used to eating highly salty foods or highly sugary foods or highly processed foods. The minute somebody puts something healthy in front of you, you're like, ugh, this is disgusting. Why? Because we've already ruined our taste buds. Our taste buds are not used to eating what is real, organic, and healthy. So the only thing we want is chemically induced and created and processed garbage, right? And there's a very famous story, which I think maybe I'll leave for another night. And it's mentioned, I think Maulana, I think Rumi mentions this story. I'm going to paraphrase it. I'm not going to actually go through the Farsi and everything, but I think it's a nice story. It has to do with those who sell perfume in the bazaars, for any of you who have gone through that story before. But inshallah, this we're going to expand a bit more on later on. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now this idea of lagh and vain and idle things has also been mentioned in other parts in the Quran. I don't want to mention every part, just one part, because it's mentioned as a quality of previous believers. So this is in Surah Al-Qasas, chapter 28, verses 52 through 55. It says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَإِذَا سَمَعُوا اللَّغْوَ أَعْرَضُوا عَنْهُ. So Allah is describing the qualities of the believers of the past, right? Of past aqwam, right? Different types of nations that came before us. And He's doing the ta'rif, right? He's showing how great they were. So He says one of these qualities is that whenever they heard lagh, whenever they heard this nonsensical, useless talk, أَعْرَضُوا عَنْهُ, they would avoid it, right? They keep away from it. And in addition, وَقَالُوا, they would say, لَنَا أَعْمَالُنَا وَلَكُمْ أَعْمَالُكُمْ. I'm going to do my thing, you do your thing. Right? And this is very, very important for us. Well, before that, let me end with the last part of the ayah. سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكُمْ لَا نَبْتَغِي الْجَاهِلِينَ. So they're like, salam, right? Peace. This stuff, the jahileen, all these things, this is not appropriate for us. Right? We don't like to hang around these kind of things. Now, obviously, for a practical tip, we don't want to say that to somebody, right? If they're engaged in useless talk, you don't say, Salam alaikum, I don't hang out with the jahileen and walk away. That's obviously not how we do things, in terms of Islamic akhlaq. And also, you don't want to say, you do your thing, I do my thing. That also may not work as well, right? لَنَا أَعْمَالُنَا وَلَكُمْ أَعْمَالُكُمْ. Sometimes people, religious individuals, they like to take these Quranic verses, they like to take these ahadith and then kind of, even though Allah makes them as light, we try to take them and use them as like shotgun blasts on people, right? We say, you know what, la ikraha fi din, boom. Lakum dinukum waliya din, boom. And you start taking these verses in hadith, oh, you're not supposed to do this, boom. Just tossing hadith and Quranic verses, insulting people, right? We have to be careful. The Quran is meant for hidayah, not for us to insult people like this. But khair. This group of individuals, they saw that even though they were in the minority, even though they weren't the majority of individuals, like for every prophet that came, whenever they gave their message, it was only the minority that believed and followed them, right? So when the majority of people were like, you guys are following nonsense, this is useless, then deep down they knew. They said, look, we're going to do our thing. We know what is right. We know what is true. And you do your thing. All right, no problem. We're not going to harass you. Don't harass us. We're not going to bother you. Don't bother us. We know what is true and beneficial for us. You can go and talk about whatever you want. So if you're going to talk about useless things like Hollywood celebrity marriages and things like that, okay, go ahead. If that's what you're interested in, you can talk about that. If you really care about Kim Kardashian and Kanye that much, go ahead. That's your thing. No problem. But we're going to go discuss some other things on the side. Now, about movies and TV shows and all this, inshallah, we're going to get to that as well. So now we have to figure this out. When we're talking about vain, idle, useless things, is it absolute or relative? Meaning, can something be useless and unbeneficial for everybody? Or is it possible that maybe it's beneficial for you but not beneficial for me? Or vice versa. Maybe listening or watching certain things is beneficial for me, but maybe it's not beneficial and useless and useful for you. So let's examine that. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay. Let's do something easy here. Okay, so I think we have a few youth here, or people, maybe like 2 or 3. So how many of you, this is about video games. How many of you think video games are a waste of time? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. How many of you think that video games are beneficial? That's it, only 2? 3? Okay, see? 3. Depends. Hasan, okay. See, that's it's a very wise answer. It depends. So typically what happens is that most of the parents are like, no, it's a waste. And usually kids, or sometimes kids who are kids at heart like me, are like, no, it can be beneficial. So now we have to ask this question. Why is there a difference of opinion? It should be obvious. Why don't we all agree on video games at least being useless or not, or useful or not? Well, it's going to be a few different things. One will be our understanding of that specific game. And like the sister was saying, it also depends on that specific game itself. Some games are pretty much clearly a waste of time, I think, right? And some games, we may be, if we're being honest, we might debate it a bit and say, okay, maybe. Like for example, I think most parents in this technology age might say, okay, if let's say some Islamic game and it's teaching Quran or Arabic or something like that, or some ahkam game, okay, maybe we can allow 15, 20 minutes of screen time, maybe. Right? So they'll kind of jump to that extreme. If it's educational, if it's Islamic, then we'll allow it. But of course, the kids are like, yeah, we're going to get bored of that stuff, right? We don't want like Quranic stuff all the time. We need some first-person shooters, we need some RPGs, right? We need some MMOs, we need some fighting games. And today, I don't think Islam has come that far, or the Islamic world has come that far where they're putting all these things out. Especially the first one, because that's very, very dangerous if they put certain things like that out there, right? So why is there a difference? Well, it's very possible that our understanding of video games itself, maybe we don't understand it fully. You see, even when it comes to, let's bring the science part of it, the scientific idea of it. It's very possible for us to not understand sometimes the scientific and empirical benefits and psychological benefits behind certain things, which may seem useless. So for many of us, we might say, no, video games are just, you just sitting there with a phone or a tablet or a controller or on your computer, like it's a waste. Your mind is shutting down, you're not doing anything. Whereas evidence, on the contrary, shows no. Many games, if not most games, actually improve your motor skills, our child's motor skills. It improves their interaction with the outside world. Again, some games can do this. So it depends. We have to look at each game specifically. So there may be some benefit even some games which are un-Islamic and non-educational. Okay, so we have to go forward in that. Say, okay, well, what else do we have to understand? Now, what we're talking about here is not just simple benefit, right? It's not just that it benefits my mind or my body. That's not what's being discussed over here in this verse. We're talking about being neglectful of God. So now when it comes to things like, let's say, video games, movies, meaning non-Islamic movies, right? Let's say we're going to watch some Marvel or DC movie. Like let's say your kids are begging you to take them to see Endgame, which you should have seen by now. If you haven't, then I don't know what's taking you so long. I've seen it 3 times already. Not even in the theaters. I've seen it illegally online. Though I don't know if I should admit that, but yeah, but it's okay. Buy me these games, buy me this. I want to watch this TV show. Is there a way that we can understand these things? Can we say that these things can become spiritually beneficial or not? That'll be our discussion tomorrow night. Do we have to completely keep away from the world? Or are there certain things within the world, part of the dunya, that we maybe can attach ourselves to that can actually spiritually, intellectually benefit us? Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ahli baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Sure. What time is Adhan, by the way? 3 minutes? Okay. So the question was about concentration in prayer. That if, let's say, I lose my concentration within my salah, right? Especially this happens in the morning time. Or it might even happen if you're offering Maghrib and Isha and you're thinking about what's for dinner, basically, right? What's for iftar. So it can happen. So the question is, can we repeat our prayer? So repeating prayer is one thing. Breaking your prayer to redo it is something else, right? So we're talking about repeat, not breaking, right? No. Yeah, because we can only break prayers for valid reasons, right? And this would not be a valid reason. For repeating prayers, I haven't seen anything specifically that says you cannot, but I also don't want to say that, yes, you absolutely can, unless somebody has seen the fatwa themselves. I'm going to double check to see if that's okay. Now we have other types of specific ahkam which say that, okay, if you've read by yourself, you can redo it in Jamaat if you want, right? It's mustahab to redo it. I've never seen specifically that one person can offer the same salah multiple times. So that, I'll see if I can check in the books and see if I can get a specific fatwa for that, inshallah, and I'll try to mention it tomorrow. Anything else, or was that Adhan? Nothing else? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.